This video is created exclusively for entertainment purposes and in no case encourages you to perform the actions that will be shown in this video. Hold on tight. Today we will see 35 amazing moments in aviation. We are very lucky that they got on camera. This compilation is full of sharp sensations, from annoying pilot mistakes to tricks that challenge gravity. You are watching Snicker Storm channel, the hub of timeless and captivating content. Sometimes flights present cute and funny surprises. For this young man, the moment of pride came. He was going to show his mother breathtaking views through the clouds. When the plane took off and his mother was already enjoying the flight, something crawling on the wing to the cabin appeared in the frame. Here is such an unexpected guest. The cat turned out to be a hare on this flight and must have gone crazy from fear. When the pilot noticed her, it became clear from his reaction that the cat was the last thing he expected to see in the air. And although the instincts told her the right actions, nevertheless, the animal had enough strength to stay on board. The pilot had to land the extra passenger, and the cat was sure and spent one of her 9 cat lives on this flight. On this beach, everyone was busy filming the flying tents, but people did not immediately understand what caused the whirlwind. Seconds before everything took off on the beach, a fighter flew over them at a terrible speed. They just did not have time to see it, but only felt the consequences, although they should have heard the sound. Helicopters are very convenient machines, only if there is enough space for them in the sky and on the ground. A very strange helicopter crash happened in the city. The pilot installed a Christmas tree, but suddenly the blades and screws got entangled in a bunch of cables, and the helicopter instantly broke in half. He immediately hit the ground, and as soon as the blades finally stopped, all the workers rushed to save the pilot. Fortunately, no one was injured, but the situation itself is quite ridiculous and dangerous. Why use a helicopter when there are so many obstacles around? The helicopter is preparing for takeoff, and while the pilots are performing the last checks of the checklist, everything seems to be fine, until the moment when the helicopter suddenly turned to the right and began to draw circles on the asphalt. If you have a basic idea of how helicopters work, then you know that it is impossible to stop this whistle dance, and the end is predetermined. The blades broke, and the hull became completely helpless. It's a miracle that the workers nearby barely managed to get out intact, because the chaotically flying debris is deadly dangerous. Good luck that no one was injured at all. From the very beginning, it was clear that something had to happen. The second helicopter continued to fly closer to the other. Therefore, the distance was already critical. I suppose that he miscalculated the distance visually. If you look closely, you will see that a person is emerging from the second helicopter as soon as a disaster occurs. He is hiding. It's a miracle that he survived, but as for the pilot, I'm sure he's waiting for an unpleasant meeting with the management. Another episode showing us the power of the downward flow. See how this plane is barely held in the air just because of the helicopter that flew in front of it. Okay, it was not an ordinary helicopter, but one of the most powerful UH-60 Black Hawk. But nevertheless, it was difficult for the pilot to hold the plane, and although he definitely deserves praise for his skill, it would be more reasonable to observe the distance. It would seem that light aviation is more mobile, but such problems occur more often. Incredible shots. Emergency landing on the highway. See how a skilled pilot literally pushes a small plane onto a 3-lane highway. It's amazing that no one was hurt, even considering that the plane still crashed into the SUV. Although the driver apparently did not realize what happened at all. Everything is fine, everyone is alive. Take a closer look, because the pilot could not do his job better. He dodged the blow, successfully passing all the poles and all the wires. And these guys made an impression. Already in the air, the engine of their private plane failed. Instead of panicking, they calmly looked at the area and decided to land the plane on a cornfield as a glider. They were lucky to find a corridor without trees, and the pilot made a successful landing on the left hand. Both guys went to the field without scratches. It seems that even the plane survived the accident with minimal damage. Calmness and calculation are the main assistants in emergency situations. I have no idea what the pilot thought of this plane. He seems to be landing, but Cessna suddenly loses control. Then he decides to take off again and try again. It's strange what he was hoping for. If something went wrong on the ground, then why should it fix itself in the air? The last thing we see is how the pilot pulls the steering wheel and the plane makes a cul-de-sac. I assume that he crashed into the hangar when trying to take off again. And now his Cessna looks like a pile of scrap metal. And I have one question left. Who filmed the pilot's actions? I hope he's okay. Another Cessna crash, but this time the reason was turbulence. Yes, this is a real phenomenon. The plane that flew in front or the helicopter creates a vortex that can last up to 2 minutes. The term turbulent trace is used to denote the lifting force that the plane leaves when it flies through the air. Unfortunately for this pilot, he got right in the center of this turbulence in the trace of the helicopter. His light Cessna completely lost control and crashed into the ground. Even if an ordinary helicopter is able to stir up the air like that, just imagine what forces and what traces, for example, the A380 leaves. That's why there are strict minimum intervals between takeoffs at airports. And this pilot was just lucky to stay alive. At first, we don't even suspect that a car video recorder may have something in common with aviation. But when we see the plane falling, hooking the power line along the way and lighting up, it's hard to believe in the reality of what's happening. It's amazing how no one got hurt. The impact seems crazy since the plane was engulfed in flames. If you look closely, you will see that there was a gas station nearby. I can't even imagine what would happen if the fall had to be a few meters lower. When you don't take off properly, something irreparable can happen. At first it seems that everything is fine, but the plane actually loses speed. Since the pilot tried to get up with less thrust, the wings were creating insufficient lift. Soon he began to understand that there was no way to stay away from this line of trees. It's not the best feeling when you're inside an uncontrollable plane, and since there's nothing you can do, the pilot had to catapult. And the plane went into an inevitable fall and crashed into the trees. Beechcraft 18 is an American passenger aircraft that has become a legendary model due to its famous low passes at air shows. Many viewers love to watch how these crazy machines fly right over their heads, and the best part of these moments is to hear the roar of its powerful engine. We are now watching how Beechcraft performs an exciting pass at a low altitude, just a couple of meters above the ground. It flies right over the audience. I advise you to skip this clip if you are afraid of disasters, but unfortunately, this is a real case filmed on camera. The tragic event took place at an aviation race in Reno, Nevada. The veteran aviator crashed his Mustang P-51 during the World War II at the National Aviation Race. 74-year-old pilot Jimmy Levat was an experienced high-flying pilot. He starred in movies as a stunt pilot and tried to take the plane away from the audience. Unfortunately, he hit his nose into the crowd. The plane performed a figure of almost 724 kilometers per hour, and although there is always a risk of accidents at these air shows, I don't think there has ever been a more traumatic incident. When the pilot gets out of the loop, everyone understands that he is too low to be safe. It was also said that the cause of the disaster was not an inaccurate calculation, but the loss of an important part of the stabilizer. Anyway, the plane disappeared in a cloud of dust in 1 second, sowing panic in the crowd and causing many injuries. But there are still desperate madmen who want to overcome all the fear in the world. Red Bull, as you know, wings, so even the most ridiculous ideas seem feasible to some. This crazy trick was just organized by Red Bull. Racing through the tunnels on an airplane is absurd, but there was a pilot who wanted and was able to do it. This racing plane can accelerate to 250 kilometers per hour. So he presses the gas and passes through tunnel number 1. When he has to enter the second one, the speed is already crazy. One wrong move and everything can turn into horror. But the pilot seems to know exactly what he is doing. He keeps his cool and manages to jump from the second tunnel to the winning set of heights. I hope no one tried to repeat it. And you do not repeat. Our video is created exclusively for entertainment. With large planes, which cost hundreds of millions of dollars, no tricks or jokes are already available. However, not all people understand the seriousness of aviation and everything related to safety. These tourists on the beach have already become witnesses of an interesting scene. The plane on the strip was very close to them and was preparing for takeoff. They approached closely and began to wait for him to start moving. They have already prepared their cameras to film it. However, they did not take into account the important thing. As soon as the plane starts the engine, they will have to fight for their lives. The pilots increase the gas, and almost everyone who is behind can be carried to the ocean along with their cameras, phones and iPads. The fact is that the power of the jet engine is not a fan. It simply blows away everything that is behind it and sucks in everything that is dangerous in front. Apparently, we are all used to being passengers, and we do not know what happens when the plane takes off from the outside. Believe me, unpleasant incidents at this airport with such observers. And this is too close for comfort. We have all seen a tight formation of fighters, but for the first time I see commercial planes flying too close. This causes concern. 2 commercial planes are flying too close to consider it safe. Yes, this shooting is part of the air show, but in any case, what experience and confidence are necessary for a pilot for such a flight? The ability to remain calm when a huge plane and both airliners are flashing in front of you at high speed is simply impressive. Bhutan Airport is perhaps the most dangerous in the world. Although it is not blown away by strong winds, its location between 2 mountains makes the approach to the landing a task that not every pilot can perform. Make yourself comfortable and enjoy the shots as these 2 pilots skillfully bring their A319 to the perfect landing between the mountains. The trick is that the last turn of the descent to the runway is very dangerous. If the pilot can't do it right, they have to go to the next lap and try again. But these pilots clearly know this airport and their business. Remember the feeling from childhood when you were driving a car and suddenly saw a plane in the sky that seemed to hang there and not move? This is exactly what happened with a small plane that could not withstand the dangerous gust of a storm wind. Suddenly, it stopped in the air for a couple of seconds before touching the runway. Although sideways, but for sure. It's a pity that we don't have a video from the cockpit, because the pilot did this landing with a circus trick, taking into account the strong headwind. Emergency landings are not a lottery. The skill of the pilot and the circumstances are important here, but also certainly luck. Boeing 787 approaches and already touches the ground, but something makes him jump in the air. The pilot decides to interrupt the landing and go to the second lap. This situation is called an interrupted landing or touch and go. Although this is not a regular situation, it is not catastrophic. Pilots practice it during training, which I can't say about the passengers. They must have suffered from fear. Although it may seem like an unsuccessful landing, the pilot deserves praise for a well-made decision. In addition, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner is of course an engineering miracle. But it is a wide fuselage aircraft that did not stop jumping on the runway. Another example of an interrupted landing. This time the Boeing 767 perfectly aligned for a smooth landing, and the pilot was expecting a light end of the flight. But as soon as the wheels touched the runway, the plane began to jump. The pilots did not immediately give up landing, thinking that they could still land. But if the plane jumps on the ground, there is a great danger to hit the tail or wing. Fortunately, they were able to immediately rise into the air and successfully land at the next approach. But these were intense jumps for sure. Another landing with a strong side wind. It seems that the pilots of this A380 knew how to perform emergency landings with a strong side wind. They calculated the trajectory forward. The plane touches the runway and lands almost sideways. It is possible that the passengers in the middle of the plane saw that the plane landed across the runway. However, the pilot leveled the plane in a matter of seconds and made a safe landing. But if you are a fan of aviation, then this clip can cheer you up. The A380, when landing, struggles with a strong side wind, and we can even notice that it enters the runway at an angle to land straight. As soon as the rear wheels touch the asphalt, it bounces off and deviates in the opposite direction. But the pilot somehow managed to escape the runway and level the plane. This is the best scene of atypical landings that I have ever seen. And I'm inclined to write everything down for the skill of the pilots. I would not like to be inside this plane. The pilot is forced to make an emergency landing because the chassis exploded. This video is shot by a passenger sitting in the back, and he filmed the moment when the plane touches the runway. A loud clatter is heard, and within a few seconds, while the bottom of the plane rubs against the asphalt, sparks fly from it, and the whole plane rumbles. The very fact that this guy is still recording the video is just madness. Nevertheless, the pilot demonstrated a flawless skill. During a hard landing, the plane avoids a tail strike, but it already looks like a scene from a militant movie. We can assess the effect with slow playback to understand how close the plane was to the loss of the wing. Probably the pilot overcomes a strong side wind, so the pilot experiences such difficulties with balancing. Trying to avoid a left wing strike on the landing strip, he desperately slows down. It must be said that a melted tire is better than a broken wing. Literally inches above the runway, he wins this fight in favor of the wings. Have you noticed anything strange about this plane? I want you to look more closely, nothing unusual. If you said that he had a chassis problem, then you were right. There was a control failure and the front wheels did not turn. They stand sideways. So the pilot essentially puts the plane without wheels on an iron rack. He circled for a long time to generate fuel, and now the landing of this car is the only option. As soon as the plane hit the strip, the chassis caught fire, and due to friction, half of the wheels literally melted. But the pilot probably got an ovation, because this emergency landing was much smoother than in previous clips. The plane had to fight a sandstorm, and we see how it heads directly to the storm front. And on this flight, I would not want to fly either. At an altitude of only 1,000 meters, he will have to overcome many difficulties. I'll tell you right away about the consequences, so you don't get scared. Everyone on board survived, but judging by their stories, it was almost a fatal experience. The propeller plane shook a lot, and after landing, it was carefully examined, all over its body. So even the propeller could fall off. A jet plane, when it hits a sandstorm, faces the same problems as when a volcano erupts. Small particles can cause the engine to fail, so in such conditions, airliners are not recommended. Something may also go wrong. In front of our eyes, the pilot is trying to perform a trick, but everything goes terribly wrong. It seems that the engine of the aircraft is dead, and in fact there is a malfunction of the fuel pump. The American fighter CF-18 can no longer add gas, and having no choice, the pilot must press the eject button. We see him ejecting the plane just a few moments before it falls. Against the backdrop of a mad explosion, when a huge black cloud covers the sky, we are comforted by the thought that the pilot survived. Despite the fact that this is a very expensive car, the refusal of it in favor of saving his life is a decision that should be made in a second and very timely. Believe it or not, but this incident actually got into the world headlines. A Seattle airport employee stole the plane and went on a crazy flight. As a result, he crashed, but before that, he terrorized the sky for 20 terrible minutes. On board, thank God, there were no passengers, but the plane was making mad coolbits. He was flying through the sky like a crazy bird. As a result, the pilot shouted to the dispatchers that he had no idea how to land this plane. He made several impressive maneuvers, and when everything started to get out of control, in the end, he had to call the fighters. ATR-72 is a popular model for short flights. On February 24, 2015, the Trans-Asia Internal Flight Company flew out of Sunshine Airport on the Taiwanese island of Jinmen to go down in history as one of the most famous incidents in aviation. Everything went in a routine mode until 3 minutes after takeoff. It went into the emergency mode. For some reason, the plane began to lose altitude and crashed into a river 5 kilometers from Taipei Airport. The pilots barely managed to escape the collision with nearby buildings. In these terrifying frames, we see how the plane literally cuts the car on the bridge before falling into the water. Although this animation allows to reproduce the incident in detail, we already have real frames. Their best part is that all passengers got out with minor injuries. Looking at this crash, it is hard to believe that someone on board remained unharmed. In any case, an investigation was carried out which found that the plane crash provoked the right engine, which just went out of order. And this tragic disaster happened at Moscow Airport on the runway. We see frames of intense fire while passengers leave the plane on inflatable and for some reason do not move away from a dangerous place. Maybe they do not realize that the plane can explode at any second. The commercial flight took off in perfect condition, but after a lightning strike and a partial failure of the electronics, they had to return with full tanks. During the hard landing, the chassis rack broke and damaged the fuel tank, which caused a strong fire in the back of the plane. Now we are watching a historical event, the last takeoff of a supersonic civilian plane Concorde from a New York airport named after John Kennedy. It was the fastest commercial aircraft reaching cruising speed of more than 2,000 kilometers per hour. And despite the obvious futuristically, the fate of this model did not happen due to a tragic incident. Look how incredibly beautiful it looks when it pierces the sky taking off for the last time. Those who love aviation know that Concorde is not just a plane, but a page in history. In terms of technology and innovations, it still has no equal. I think we can all agree that the landing on this video was really tough. But you will be surprised when you find out that the plane risked breaking in half. The pilot actually almost broke it. During a hard landing, when the plane jumps off the ground, it bends. In fact, it is a flexible but metal pipe. Try to imagine what will happen if you bend it back and forth. A gap appears in the hull. We can just admire it. And now it is clear that the pilot almost broke this plane in half. And now the liner is not suitable for flights. We see both planes in the frame and wonder if it is not as obvious for the pilot who steers on the runway. It seems that even behind the wheel of a car, the most logical thing when leaving the yard to the street is just to look around instinctively. We do not know the reason for the situation, or they did not have coordination with the dispatch tower, or this pilot violated the protocol and left without noticing that a huge liner was rushing at him. One way or another, seconds or their share decide the case. Fortunately, the pilot of the second plane noticed the interference in time and interrupted the landing at the stage when it was still possible. By pressing the gas and lifting the plane back into the air, he saved the world from one of the most terrible disasters in the history of aviation. Yes, today there will be enough disasters and terrible mistakes. Let's look at a beautiful phenomenon that is always admired. When the plane flies through the clouds, it creates impressive whirlwinds. A majestic sight that is worth seeing. Don't these clouds look like the wings of angels? And if you take a closer look, you will even see how this Airbus, due to its powerful lift, creates its own clouds above the wings. Now you know what a turbulent trail looks like. That's all for today, but we want to ask you what moment of these aviation incidents made you open your mouth from amazement? Write comments like, "But with you was the channel Snicker Storm, the hub of timeless and captivating content." Subscribe and thanks for watching.